Hello, what is up? Welcome back to the SuperCoach Experience podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Savage, the coach of the Savage Turbos, and we are back for a Patreon Q&A. I did put a call out last week to the Patreon members, and we're going to get some Patreon members in the next couple of weeks on the podcast to rate their team, ask their biggest burning questions, what they want answered in their team, and I guess things that they think are good in their side as well. I want to get every single Patreon member that wants to join on the podcast before the preseason starts. Maybe we'll even get them on when the preseason is here. But I've got some questions that I put out today. Kirby is the first one. Says, thoughts on holding Humphreys? Have a feeling Dodd won't last long. And I think you might be right. Dodd did get dropped to reserve grade late last year in the Super League. But what I think is that Lewis Dodd actually signed with the club and they got dropped. Yeah, I don't think it's Dodd's skill. I just think it was a circumstance that made him get dropped. And, you know, I think Wayne Bennett's a good coach, and whoever gets picked there early on is going to last as long as possible, probably till round 10 at least, depending on how they go. And I don't see the Rabbitohs losing many games up until round 10. I guess we saw him with the Dolphins, how he chopped and changed Isaiah Katoa a bit, but that was towards late in the season. He really stuck with Isaiah Katoa early last year, and I think he'll do the same with Dodd, especially if Dodd is the guy. So with Humphreys, I think he will get named off the bench. He probably will be a slow burn. Probably won't be a great option till he does get a starting role. I probably wouldn't buy him at all. I know the optics look great. He big muscles, you know, he's a big dude. But yeah, personally, I'd just probably stay away from Humphreys. I think there's enough out there, Supercoach-wise, to go past him. But I get the appeal. He was very juicy looking last year. David717, love to hear a discussion on the dual position player. Don't think it gets enough attention that it deserves or taken advantage of enough. Hooker this year is a great example, starting with Grant and Smith in Hooker and Watson at 2RF allows for Watson to go to Hooker at some point without a trade. Who's going to complain with a Grant and Watson combo long term with no extra trades being used? If Smith is looking like a long-term option, then you can move him back up to halfback when your hooker maxes out and another trade is saved. In theory, your backup halfback makes $250K and gets sold. Smith to halfback, Watson to hooker, and Gunn to RF with one trade used. Bird is another option. Horsburgh, Tino, Barnett, White, Luai, Clark, Martin, Plath, Lucas, all bring that extra something to the table without weakening your team. This also brings added flexibility come the buy rounds. For mine, this is the quickest way to max depth and minimum trades. Whilst all may not come off, if you have 3, 4, 5 of these options in your team and hit 2 or 3 pay dirt, it's a massive leg up for those fighting to push from 5K to top 1K. It's a long-winded question, but it is very valid. I think with the case of Connor Watson, Sandon Smith, I don't hate the thought process behind putting Connor Watson at 2RF and then being able to shift him up to hooker in case one of them is a dud or, you know, a halfback maxes out. I think that really maximizes your chances to sell the dud or sell the person who makes quick cash quickly. But at the same time, I just think you've got to choose who's best in that position and who is best for you. So, for example, putting Connor Watson in your 2RF instead of hooker, I think is a waste. I think you've got to go Connor Watson or Harry Grant at hooker. I think at that price, $580K, you know, you only need to spend $70K more to get Hopgood, $80K more to get Hamoli Olakau'atu. At around the same price, for cheaper, you can get Tino. I know Tino's a dual position player, but I think there's enough dual positions this year to kind of maximize your opportunities for depth. So, like, for instance, Sandon Smith is available at hooker and halfback. He's going to be one of the most owned players this year, and you're going to be able to flip him regardless. Nafahu White, Corey Horsburgh, Tino, all front row, second row. So, like, unlike years past, we have that depth in front row now, unlike years past where it's kind of been your top 2 front rowers, and if one goes down for a week, you're using a dud to play, but we don't have that anymore because we can flip these guys between front row and second row. I guess with Jack Bird as well, $379,000. I do like Jack Bird, but also I think the stocks in the second row versus the stocks in the center wing are very different, and I think Jack Bird fits either mould. It looks like we're going to get more bottom dollar cheapies in the centre wing, so I kind of like Jack Bird up in the second row. And I also like it if, a centre wing maxes out and you've got Jack Bird, you can flip him straight down to centre wing. So there is obviously advantages, but at the same time, I wouldn't read too much into it into your starting team because, it could all go downhill with all the players you get anyway. So like Connor Watson, he's the only 9 at the Roosters at the moment, and he's likely to get 80 minutes. But what happens if the first week, they spell him for 20 minutes and he doesn't get the role you expected? And then all of a sudden, Sandon Smith is a dud and it doesn't look like he's going to make heaps of money. And then, you're looking at Harry Grant. He's probably not performing the way you want him to. If all this goes wrong, then it could be a disaster. If it all goes right, then it could be perfect. But I wouldn't be building my side around that tactic. But I do like the thoughts, and I think it's definitely something to think about. If you're choosing between a certain player and another player, so let's say you're choosing between Pia Cora and Jack Bird, maybe Jack Bird just gets that edge just because you're like, I'm not sure about Pia Cora. I'm not sure about Jack Bird. I need one of these guys around this price range. Plug in Jack Bird. You'll thank yourself later, because I think by the end of the day, that flexibility is so valuable at the end of the day. But as I said, don't build your side around it, because I think you can become stuck with that. Gary, hi guys. Want to know about the loop, if you can explain to how and why it works. This question comes up every year with the newbies, but I guess with someone joining a Patreon, you're either wanting to learn more knowledge or you're wanting to learn more about what the game is at the moment. So you could be experienced at SuperCoach, Gary, or you could not be. I'm not sure. But let's say you are. That's a valid question this year, especially with the flex player and your 18th player dropping out. This year's loop is crucial. So basically the loop is you vice captain a player. If that player gets 120 plus, it could be any score that you think is going to be a good captain score. You can take that score if you like. Say you got the captain on James Tedesco who's playing. You take that captaincy off James Tedesco and put it on a non-playing player who doesn't play. And once that player locks out, then it automatically goes to your vice captain score. And then you get an auto emergency from your non-selected players coming onto your field. But your auto emergency is the lowest score from your non-selected players. Now, this is going to be a very tricky one to work out this year. And it's going to be tricky to kind of navigate your head around, because it's hard to explain, but I think I get it, all right? So let's say Vice Captain Terrell May scores 130 week 1. I've got my captaincy on Latrell, and, one of my hookers, I want to take out a hooker, and let's say I've got enough hooker, which why would you do that? Actually, we'll take out a front row. We'll take out Nafahu White. We're putting in Tino because Tino is not playing this week. Round 1, we captain Tino. We get that 130 looped. So we're now on 260. Nafahu White is out of our selected players, out of our top 18. And then our emergency score, let's say it's a Josh Schuster of 23. That comes in. If 23 is the lowest score of your selected 18 players, then the 23 drops out anyway. So I think this year the loop is more crucial than ever, and I think we'll be taking lower scores week in and week out. And I think once you do it once, you'll be more confident to do it. But I do see the loop being effectful this year. Do we see more players going a Terrell May as a VC more often than not, just to get that guaranteed points? Or are we still going to chase the upside? Of course we are. But I think just being able to vice captain and captain 2 fullbacks is crucial. And I think we're just going to be taking, they go over 90, we're going to be taking it. So, yeah, the auto emergency comes in. Obviously, if the Josh Schuster 23 comes into your side and, you've got a Billy Smith starting and he's already got 22, then Billy Smith drops out. So, you're not really losing much by looping, really. But that's in a good situation, I guess. I guess in certain situations you might actually lose because let's say your auto emoji player comes in, the lowest score is 60. Actually, no, it's just a win-win. Like there's no loss. Like I reckon there'll be some cases, where an auto emoji is better than what is on your field, and you want to get that auto emoji onto the field so that other player drops out, and you might have to, burn a trade here and there to make it happen. So, very interesting way to use the tactic this year, and I think what I'll be doing, especially later in the year, if I've got nothing to lose, I'll be exploiting it as much as I can. Douglas, thoughts on KO Weeks as an option in 5-8? Have him as a reserve at the moment. I think he could be a play. I answered this question last week, Douglas. So go back to the Q&A episode last week. KO Weeks, I think he's a brilliant talent. I think the Canberra Raiders have struck gold with him. Obviously, him and Chevy Stewart are fighting out for that fullback position. It looks like he'll get it. But at the same time, the Canberra Raiders don't have much attack, so he'll be relied on. Like Fogarty in the side, they've got a decent draw early on, and we know Ricky doesn't let his players down nice and early. All right, last question. Michael Finch. Hey, lads, question for you. How do you rate Mitchell Moses and Lewis Dodd as a SuperCoach option heading into the season? Are they worth considering as starting halves, or do you see better value elsewhere? Not sold on Cleary's fitness for the opening rounds. Now, as the preseason goes on, I'm actually more sold on Cleary than I was any time in the preseason, but his draw just puts me off. So I know Cleary, he's this type of person that draw doesn't matter, but for me, he's not scoring 150 against the likes of Melbourne, the Sharks in Vegas. He might get 90 to 100, but for me, I'm just not taking the risk on him early. He is coming back from a shoulder injury. And Penrith, I'm not saying they start slow, but I think they ease into the season. I think with the Las Vegas and no World Club Challenge, it will be slightly different this year. I think they will try and hit Vegas with a bang, but Penrith are a September footy side. They try and time their run. They're not peaking in fitness in March. They're going to be peaking in fitness in September. So, whilst I still think he will be good, I'm not rushing to get him. I don't think it's necessarily a must-have early on. I will be looking to get him in after their bye. I think that's around 6 or 7. But I guess with Mitch Moses, he's not goal kicking potentially. Zach Lomax might get the goal kicking. He could be paid back a little bit with a dynamic right edge. It looks like Kelman Tuolangi might get that right edge spot. Zach Lomax on that right side just opens up more opportunities for Moses. So, he might get a bit more upside in attacking stats, but in terms of goal kicking, he loses that. And them big 120-plus games just don't happen because he's not goal kicking. I think his ceiling is flawed now with him not goal kicking to 110 instead of 140, 150. So I don't love Mitch Moses, but I really think he is undervalued if he is kicking goals. And I see a world where, he's probably handed the captaincy, might kick goals still. So I guess let's wait and see. We'll wait and see who kicks goals in trials, and then, we'll go from there. Lewis Dodd, spoke about him the first question, obviously. But in terms of SuperCoach output, in a side like the Rabbitohs, who are an attacking weapon of a side, I guess we saw how Lockie Ilias had a great season. Adam Reynolds took them to a grand final, and he was never really SuperCoach relevant. Adam Reynolds, I think, averaged 53 there or something. Lockie Ilias, even when he took them to a prelim, didn't average that much. I think, the likes of Cody, Latrell, Cameron Murray, there's Keon there now. If Keon's on his edge, it's good for Lewis Dodd. But I think Lewis Dodd's at the price where he can hurt you if you buy him and take the risk. Because he's at that price where you're like, I could probably play him week in and week out. But, he's probably at the price where you can probably just wait. And especially if he eases into the season, you can probably wait and take a punt on him later on if he does absolutely brain it. I don't think he's a must-have. I see people with him in their side. honestly, you're buying blind. I know a lot of the time we are buying blind in SuperCoach, but I think especially in a halves position, Sandon Smith, pretty solid halves option. And, we know what we're getting with some of our hookers. Like Peter Mavazelis, I'm pretty confident he is a good cheapie. And, Blake Moser, if he gets a minute, if Walters isn't there. I just think there's a lot more options in different spots to not go Dodd. Anyway, that's it for the Q&A podcast episode. Lads, if you're on the Patreon page, you'll be hearing this on Tuesday night. If you are a member to the public that isn't Patreon, you'll be hearing this on Thursday morning. But thank you guys for tuning in. It's been a pleasure. And yeah, sign up to the Patreon if you want to answer your questions and get on the podcast for me to review your team and let's talk some crap. Cheers, guys.